Great.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Photo Booth International podcast. Jasmine Pather here. Today, I have Jason Treu. I'm excited to bring him on because we're going to be talking about culture. And to tell you guys a little bit about Jason, he is actually a TEDx speaker, as well as a best-selling author, executive coach, and a leadership expert who is helping entrepreneurs create productive and engaged work cultures. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Welcome.
Hey, well, it's fantastic to be here and talk to your fantastic tribe and all the people that are out there today.
Wonderful. Now, tell me a little bit about your story, right? What made you dig deeper into the concept of the topic of culture in the workplace?
Well, I've worked in Silicon Valley and was out there during the heyday. I got to work with people like, Steve Jobs, the current CEO of Netflix. I mean, Mark Cuban briefly when his company was first acquired and he was living in an apartment here in Dallas. And, over the years of working of all those people, and I've worked in large companies, I started to see that my performance in my production, my success and my fulfillment was driven not only by the things I was working on, but the team and environment I was in. And that actually even was more important than what I was working on itself as I dug deeper. And so I realized that, if we're in a situation that brings out the best in us, we can do great, far superior work, which leads to a lot of other opportunities, both personally, professionally, financially. But the key is, how can we create that ourselves? What environment should we start to look at, right? And all the questions that need to ask. And then how can people actually do this and create this? Because the other challenge I found was that, people were able to do this who owned and ran a business one time, but oftentimes the second or third time they would fail. And it would really make a significant difference in the outcomes. And when you look at all, and then I dug deeper and you look at all the financial data, you really find that the competitiveness for a company, right? Like I work with a lot of clients that are, some of them are only 3, 5, 7, 10 people that are actually outflanking and doing better than people who have 50, 100, 150, 200 people. Mm-hmm. And it always begs the question, well, how is that possible? And I'm like, well, it's because of the team and how well they work together. And it's not because those 5 people are superstars. It's because they're a collective superstar as a unit, right? So you don't have to have as an A player. Mm-hmm. And I think that is really the critical difference that I started to find. And I wanted to share with people because ultimately we only have one life to live. And if we're going every day and working, we might as well be more successful, right? And we might as well be more fulfilled. But the key is kind of how do you start to figure that out? And also, if you're like an individual contributor in this role, like how do you start to influence this? Or if you're a small business owner and you're looking at it, or any owner, like how can you actually create this in an easier way? And how do you think about this?
Yeah. Definitely. Those are great questions to ask yourself. So I'm sure that's what helped you kind of dive deeper and really take a closer look, right? Like you said, there's companies that have very small teams, but have ranked Inc. 5000, while there's other companies that have such a larger scale team, but haven't reached that same amount of success. So culture is definitely one of the key ingredients in that success formula, I think. So
and one of the other challenges is how do you keep that going over time? Because what happens a lot of times is you'll see companies do really well in year 1, 3, or 5, and then all of a sudden the company ends up not doing well moving forward. Mm-hmm. And really, when you look at it, not that much has changed, but the financials and the outcomes and the turnover has. And so I think that really becomes the missing link, because when I go out to clients and I ask questions, right, all the time, one of the things that I think should be on every agenda, no matter what size the business is, if you have like more than one person in the company, and even if you don't, it's teamwork, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can you work and collaborate with people to bring out the best of them, even if you're a solo entrepreneur? How do you do that? And what I find is that almost never, right? I don't even know if I've ever actually found it on someone's, no matter what scale or size of the team, right? Or resources that they have. And that becomes a problem because it's not always a sales problem, right? It partly is, but it's how you're working together as a unit and as a team. And if it's not a priority, what ends up happening is it's an afterthought. But we should have some team building exercise. Oh, maybe we need to communicate better. Maybe I don't need to talk down to that person. Maybe, like you'll think about that after the fact, but you don't really put it into the DNA of the business. And when you look at successful people over time, the things that rise to the top are the soft skills, not the hard skills.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference, right? And of course, we see people that do really well, that are jerks or whatever, but they have really good soft skills. Now, eventually, those tendencies catch up to people over time, right? But oftentimes they don't when we look at them in that moment or we see them, but they are naturally good at things that are really important in the business itself. So that's why when people listen to this, why does it matter? I'm like, it matters because you have to work and bring the best out of these people. And if you don't, customers, partners, people in your business will leave you and not be there. And you'll wake up wondering, why aren't they there?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because you didn't prioritize this. You prioritized other things. Sure that they're important, but this needs to be up there among them.
I'm totally 100% agreeing with you on that. I think that if you lay that foundation, then you don't have as high of a turnover. And in turn, you just have that really loyal team that A, knows each other's strengths and weaknesses, but B, is also willing to just really work as a team long term and just stick with you, right? Because I think when a lot of people start a business, they don't necessarily think about what are my core values? What is my mission as a company, as a person? Because all of that attributes to the type of people that you tend to draw in to your company, whether it's small or larger. And so what are some of the other key concepts that you believe that people should understand about creating high performing culture?
Well, I think one of them is success and fulfillment go hand in hand, right? That's why it's important to have the values that you stand for and want people to exhibit in your company as something that you look at, right? And you could even take it as something, I tell people who are small business owners, don't create something so difficult or so time consuming. You don't have to have like a crazy mission statement that's so unique that it takes you a month to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if all your mission statement is like you're working in a photo booth, is that we want to sell more photo booths, right? Or we want to give, it's not that, right? You have to have something like we're selling these like photo booths to create memories for people that last a lifetime that they only can take in that instant. They can't take in their house, right? And then it makes it come alive because it's a bigger, broader mission that you can enroll people in and they can get excited about. But you can't get excited about if it's just about the money, because all you're going to do is constantly want more and more. And you're going to make poor business decisions when it comes to all of those things. The other part of this is that all the things we're talking about, I wouldn't expect someone listening to this to understand this, right? Because I didn't. So what has to happen today, especially after COVID, is that your skill sets that you need to run and manage a business are significantly greater. And the competition is growing greater because people are at home trying to think about how to be an entrepreneur. So one of the things you have to do is invest in your own education, right? And part of this is learning, right, your core business, whatever that might be. But then you have to invest in yourself to learn management, leadership, teamwork, other things on a consistent basis and put some time aside to learn them because they're learned behaviors, right? There's no baby that got born that woke up that was like naturally a great leader, right? Or manager, right? Who knew, well, here are the best practices and how to do one-on-ones with employees, right? I mean, that never happened ever. So no one should have the expectation of that. And there's not the expectation you should be great overnight. The problem is people don't do any of this. And
Mm.
they think because they're successful in their business that they're doing a great job. But that's not how it works, right? You have to constantly be learning. And I think one of the most undervalued qualities is curiosity, right? When you're curious, you start asking questions, you learning, you stay open, you don't have an ego, and you get better.
Mm-hmm.
But when you don't do that, that's the problem. So I always tell people, one, you've got to figure out some values to stand for. And you could even figure out 3 that are important to you. And yeah, you can make a list of 10, but you can just say, okay, for now, we only could put 3. We can have some sort of mission statement. It might not be perfect, but it encompasses more than money or success. Then how are we going to invest in our education, right? In a company, there's a lot of low cost things you can do. And it should be for employees too, because if the employees don't know, then they won't be able to do well. But, the 4th thing, as I said, teamwork. How can we create a better teamwork? How can communication, transparency amongst all of us? And I would say the other part of this is we have to manage our own head, right? The challenge in being an entrepreneur is a learned behavior is constantly taking leaps of faith and going into uncertainty and in places you're not really sure of that how you're going to get to the next step. And you have to be able to do that in a healthy way. Otherwise, it'll drive you crazy. So the fear is always going to be there. The imposter syndrome of like, how can I do this? How can I possibly run a business when I've never done this before and I've got to learn all of these things and there's people out there doing it and they're smarter than me. Like I have clients who are running $1 billion business and they think like that. So,
Wow.
right. So I've never met a senior leader who doesn't have imposter syndrome, right? Who doesn't think that they're overwhelmed. There are like too many things here. They're not good enough. So if you're thinking that today, you're not all alone. And that's the problem with fears. When we think we're all alone, then we recoil and we don't move through the fear, right? Mm-hmm. So part of that is through education, because then you see other people are like that. Part of that support, part of that's getting coaching and learning and other things. But that's a key piece of it, that you're not going alone with all of these things. And so I think if you start with these things, right, along with understanding the fundamentals of your core business and how to be successful, you can really build something much more quickly that's better and for the longer term, and get the people that are on your team to take more accountability, to actually be more successful. And that's how you ramp the business quicker.
Wow. I think that's so important for people to understand what you just said. I mean, people who are way up there that you would think, wow, they've made it, they still experience that same fear and imposter syndrome. And so it just goes to show, like you said, you have to get more comfortable with being uncertain. And
that's life, right? I mean, we live in COVID. I mean, like,
yep.
Here's the thing. No one has any of this stuff figured out, right? I've companies I'm working with that have, thousands and tens of thousands of remote employees, and they don't know what they're doing, right? And they freely admit it, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't know what you're doing, you're in a great company. And part of right now what's happening to people is they're having to try things they have no idea that are going to work, that could completely blow up. Mm-hmm. And they will be successful because they're trying, but there's a lot of people that are paralyzed, that are sitting in fear, not doing anything because they're not sure it's going to work, and they don't want to spend the money, and they want to wait around. Well, that's the problem, right? You can wait around forever. And right now, because so much is uncertain and we're never going to go back to normal. Whatever happened in February of 2020 will never, ever, ever happen again in our lifetime. It is permanently changed, and people have to adjust that it's a significant change in how we do business. And that is where people are really struggling, because they think there's a vaccine and we're going to go back to this old way of doing business and thinking about business. And that's just not going to be the case, because it's just not going to happen. And the quicker people figure that out, the faster they can move ahead and understand that now there's a lot more that they're going to have to do in their business to be successful, right? Not only as a business owner, but as a leader and a manager, right? And a team leader. Mm-hmm. And a personal, like a lot of people, again, I'd say the last thing I forgot to mention was everyone comes to work with a baggage, right, of sitting at home.
Yes.
And when you don't really take a personal vested interest in the people that are there, a lot of the times I'll find that personal problems will get in the way of performance. Now, you have to have accountability. You have to have boundaries, right? It can't be about you're the therapist. But there also is another part of it where, if don't ask, don't tell is not also is a losing policy as well. So there has to be something in the middle that what's going on with people and can support them while ensuring that they do their job and it doesn't get in the way of your own business. And sure, there's a fine line and it's not going to be perfect, but you can't have like either end of the spectrum. It has to be closer to the middle.
I see. So what advice would you have for someone who is maybe hasn't set up that that relationship between their employees and them as the owner of the company, right? They've never had a conversation about values. They've never had a conversation about mission statement. And like you said, 3 core values is better than nothing, just to kind of give you a sense of direction. So what advice would you have for someone who is listening and is realizing, okay, I'm going to take, 30 minutes, 1 hour to sit down and really think, what do I stand for? And then how do they communicate that to existing team members, when they've never had the conversation before?
Well, one, you could say, look, we need to do some fundamental changes in the business, right? I want to take a broader perspective of this other than just like a business where people are making money and I'm paying you, right? And we're going to I want to experiment with some things and show you them. I want to get your feedback on them, get your input, and see what you think about this, if there should be any changes, additions, right? And that's about creating psychological safety. It's a fancy term, but what it really means is the ability for people to speak up, challenge ideas, right, in a respectful way, right? And share their opinions. And I think what you want to do in that essence is you'd want to show them your mission statement and values and say, okay, well, what do you think about these? If we only could pick 3, right? I mean, we know we could pick 20, right? But if you only had to pick 3, what do you think about this? Do you think that there's something that should be different? And you can have a discussion with them, right? And you can have them change it, reword it. It doesn't really, that's the whole point, because then you enroll them in it. If you just show it to them and say, here's what it is, you're forcing someone to do what you want them to do rather than to get your buy-in. And then you can ask them, like, take a look at these, like, give them ahead of time so they have some chance to look at it. Because if you spring it on them in a meeting, like, no one's going to have an opinion. And then what you do is you take the feedback, you listen, right? You can ask questions, right? And ultimately, you as the business owner have to make the decision. You don't have to agree with them and do it. But you're getting outside information and you need to stay open to it as you're thinking about it and if you say no immediately in your head, then you say to yourself, why am I really saying no to this? Like, where is the bias in this? Because that often happens to people, right? I mean, like, I had a client of mine a couple of years ago who had a person they were going to promote, but they left relatively early every day at like 6 o'clock to go to the gym because they met up with some other people to go. And people were like, well, that person's leaving early. And I'm like, well, what's the point of leaving early? Isn't it about the results? I said, let's go after what this person's results. And we had this discussion and the results were amazing. And I said, you're now being biased against being present. And you didn't even realize it. And you weren't going to promote an employee who was doing an incredible job, right? A 10 out of 10, clearly. And I was like, that's the problem. When your head says no immediately, you have to sit back and question what's going on. So I would say that's part of it in sharing with people. I would say that the other thing to do is you really got to get to know people on a deep level, because one of the challenges when you're working in a smaller team is you have to gain trust with them, right? Trust is like the foundation that a house is built on. It's the first thing. And really no one looks at it like this. Trust is being brought up more in the last 6 months than I'd ever seen it brought up. And if you look at the research, right, because I read it all the time, it's not. And so the issue with trust is that you have to think about it. Those people have to trust me. like the people in my inner circle in my personal life, the people that are closest to me. If I don't trust them and they don't trust me like this, creating high performance and a great business is not possible because I don't have them bought in. They're not going to have my back. I'm not going to have their back. And is that really the business that I want to create? And how hard is someone going to work, right, if they don't? And so I look at it and saying to people on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being horrible and 5 being like incredible, if it's not a 5, you're in trouble. And that is one of the questions you have to start asking yourself as a business owner, right? So I started to ask myself this question years ago because I had all my clients had team issues, right? End of the day, right? Like no matter what business you're in, whether it's one person or whether it's a lot, you have people that you need to get bought into what you're doing. And I started to think about what could I create for them, because every time people are coming to me and I was like, well, I have to come up with the solution for them instead of coming up with some sort of standardized thing that they could do on their own as well as me. And so I thought there has to be a way, right? And I looked and I couldn't really find anything. So I came across this research study by Professor Arthur Aaron back in 1997. And I found this by reading a New York Times article about a woman who fell in love, and she went to a bar and asked a guy 36 questions. And I thought to myself, well, any woman who go to a bar asks 36 questions, get a guy to fall in love and then get married, there has to be something here, right?
Definitely.
So I thought it was clickbait, right? I mean, I clicked on it, the link for the research, and even the New York Times, and that happened in the back of my head. And then it came to the study, and what he ended up doing was having 54 grad students that were strangers ask each other 36 questions over 45 minutes, right? They were pretty vulnerable questions of themselves, and they just asked it back and forth. So really not that much time. And what I found is that they found that at the end of 45 minutes, 30% of the people created the closest relationships in their life.
Wow.
Right? The closest relationships in their life by asking questions, right? And then I started to think myself, well, that's the same thing that we do when we meet a stranger, and everyone's met someone. Within 5 or 10 minutes, they felt like they've known them all their life, right? Or like they've been on the same wavelength. And I'm like, it's because of the vulnerability and the questions and getting to know people in a deep way. And that's what we all crave, is to do that. And so I started to look and think to myself, well, that's great one-on-one, but what about in a team environment? Like, how would that look like doing it? So I did an experiment where I had someone I didn't really know well get together people that I wasn't linked to on social media. I had no idea. And there were like, total of 8 people. And I asked him his questions, and it was unreal, the answers I got. I thought I was on a reality TV show, and people were just enthralled. Like they were glued to actually having these conversations with each other, and I could see this. And I thought to myself, okay, let me try this in a business setting. And I found a business that was in trouble. It was a small business, it was like 10 people. And they had huge arguments among some of the people. And I played the game. I created this game then with some questions. And it's Cards Against Mundanity. And what I asked, it's basically asking a question of everyone in the group, and everyone answers the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing at the end of like 90 minutes how everyone was interacting differently. Because what happened is they learned information they would have never shared to anyone else. They got to know each other, both on an experience level people went through, an emotional level. And what they did was they saw themselves in every single person, some people more than others. But they realized that a lot of the people that they had issues with, they were like in many ways, that they had similar backgrounds. And a lot of the things they assumed about them and the bias and judgments were actually completely wrong, right? So what ends up happening then is people start to question what they thought, and they're willing to open the door. And that is a bridge to building more trust and taking down conflict, right? And after doing a few more things that weren't that difficult, they ended up getting back on track, and today are doing really well. And all the people are still there, and no one quit,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
So I found that one of the secrets in building trust is just to ask people questions such as, what's the most important lesson you've learned in the last year, either personally or professionally? If you had to thank one person for helping you become the person you are today, who would that person be? What was your biggest setback in the last, 5 years, and how did you overcome it? Or even fun questions like, if someone was to play you in a movie, who would that person be and why? Or, tell me your favorite superhero and, why that person is.
Yeah.
And it just gets to start to know people, and you get answers from every person in the group, whether it's 3 people or 5 people or whatever. And it gets you to know people on a real personal level. And the other thing I have tell people to do at this point is to create a how to work with me manual, which is essentially like you're going to IKEA and getting an instruction book. And it's questions like, so what are your pet peeves, right? How does someone build trust with you? How do you like people to communicate with you? If you have people that have to challenge your ideas or bring you bad news or have hard conversations, how do you like them to approach you?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of guessing or predicting, which we are poor at as human beings, because we're really good at people that are like us, which is a very low percentage of the population, we're very poor with other people because we use our blueprint, how we see the world, and apply it to them.
Yes.
Well, right? And so it's something simple like that. And you have everyone fill it out and go through with each other.
Mm.
And it's quick, it's easy, and it's simple. And as you do these things, that's what gets in the way of people who are doing business. It's not the business itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's the misinterpretations. It's the miscommunications. It's the misunderstandings. It's the lack of empathy, right? And all of those other things that cause problems between people. Not understanding what motivates the other person. Like, what do they actually need? Not what we think that they need, but what do they need? And how many times have you asked that question?
Yeah.
That really causes all of these problems. And that's why I said before, this is all learned behavior, right? So anyone listen to this, like, you shouldn't know this, but now you do. And the point is, a lot of this stuff is very low cost. It can be free, or it doesn't cost that much to start doing it.
Yeah.
And it's a core part of the business, just like the rest of the businesses. And if you don't do it, it will cause you so much time, so much energy, so much wasted money. And the research shows all that of what's going on. So.
Wow, so powerful. I think what you said really stuck out to me about just taking the time to just ask a little bit more personal questions instead of, hey, good roads, good weather type conversations. Let's go a step deeper and let's create a bond in that way. And let's also ask for feedback, right? If you've never established any core values or mission statement, make the employee feel like they're a member of your team, because they are, right? And not just say, here you go, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to follow. And that's how you get that buy-in. I love that.
I mean, how many people, it's like, do you want to have a parent like tell you what to do and say, go do it, I don't care, right? And you're not a child
Because I say
anymore.
so.
But you're treated like that, right?
Exactly.
Like, who's going to respond well to that environment working? Exactly. If you're an owner of doing a business, think to yourself, really, would you do that well? How many times have people just told you to do something without asking you anything? Right? Now, again, in a business owner, you have to make decisions, and it is up to you, but that doesn't mean you can't get feedback, ask questions, and take into account other people's opinion before you make a decision.
Exactly. And just seeing people for what they are as people, right? There's employee and there's CEO, but at the end of the day, we're all human. And like you said,
Yep.
We all crave that intimacy in some way or another, or just building up a foundation to a stronger relationship. So I think letting go of the ego and just communicating face to face as you would with a friend, but still having those boundaries, like you said, that for me was golden. Thank you so much. So where can people find you or find your cards against mundanity?
Yep. So you can go to my website, and it's jasontreu.com. And there you can see my coaching. I have a book on Amazon, Social Wealth. And then you can get a copy of Cards Against Mundanity. There's a free version and there's a paid version. That's the real playing cards there.
Okay.
that you can get as well. So it's and you go to cardsagainstmundanity.com as well.
Okay.
So either way, you can find it. So
I'm gonna go right now and buy those for our own team. I think they would add a lot of value and kind of bring a sense of community back after we've been working from home this whole time. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you again for being on our podcast today. And yeah, guys, if you found that information useful in any way, shape, or form, make sure to follow Jason and make sure to let him know how he's helped you sort of think about how you can create a culture for your new business. All right. And with that being said, we'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.